di archeologia o perché siete andati a scavare in uno dei siti in Sicilia o in Spagna che lui ha da alcuni anni e che come noi membri del progetto Memola partecipiamo con voi, con i nostri studenti. Per me, José Maria, e questo non voglio non dirlo, è un esempio a seguire. Vi assicuro che io di esempi a seguire tanti non ne ho, a parte il professor Progiolo e pochi più. Il professor CIVANTOS è veramente un esempio a seguire, credo, per me, per tanti docenti giovani e per molti di voi. Questo perché? Perché è una persona che si è sempre caratterizzata, da quando io l'ho conosciuto, che stava facendo il dottorato, penso, a Siena, fino ad oggi si è caratterizzato per un grandissimo impegno per difendere cause che lui considerava giuste o per andare un po', cosa che a me piace molto, contro il sistema, contro quello che le istituzioni ci hanno applicato, ci vogliono far fare e invece in molti casi crede e crediamo che non siano quelle adeguate per, fondamentalmente, ieri mi ha detto una cosa molto bella, noi stiamo qua per salvare il pianeta e può sembrare esagerato, ma in realtà non lo è. Il professor CIVANTOS questo l'ha portato a termine molto tempo, quando non era ancora docente universitario, quando aveva molti problemi nell'università, mentre studiava, dopo cercando un posto di lavoro, e questa sua forza di volontà, questo suo impegno per le cose che crede, per l'ecologia, per la partecipazione della gente, per le motivazioni sociali, che fa non solo in archeologia ma nella sua vita quotidiana. Vi posso dire, ogni volta che vado a Granada tremo, perché non so che manifestazione mi farà andare o a che prigioniero in carcere andremo a visitare e cose di questo tipo. Questo che potrebbe sembrare qualcosa alieno al ruolo di un ricercatore, di uno studioso, è stato invece riconosciuto dalla comunità europea e quindi dalle massime istituzioni che ci governano oggi, con un grande progetto europeo che vi posso assicurare sono difficilissimi a ottenere, grande progetto europeo che non solo ha ricevuto, ma è stato premiato dalla comunità europea l'anno scorso come il miglior progetto in corso di cultural heritage, per patrimonio culturale, quindi un riconoscimento enorme che penso si moltiplicherà ancora dopo il progetto, una volta si vedano i risultati e una volta la comunità europea si renda conto di realmente quello che abbiamo fatto e l'impatto che ha avuto il nostro progetto, visto che siamo anche noi dentro del progetto Memola Comunità Italiana. L'impatto del progetto Memola ha avuto sulla società e sulle diverse comunità locali sulle quali abbiamo interagito e con le quali abbiamo interagito. Per me partecipare in questo progetto, devo dire che noi con Progiolo lo fa dagli anni 60, il lavorare con le comunità locali, fare archeologia dal basso, fare archeologia locale per la gente, che poi però abbia un impatto più ampio. Questo l'abbiamo sempre fatto, ma mi sono solo resa conto, devo dire, lo facevamo perché ci piace, fondamentalmente ci piace parlare con la gente, ci piace lavorare con la gente, ci piace fare cose che siano in più di semplicemente restare sotto e dentro delle quattro pareti del nostro Liviano o dentro del ghetto scavo, no? Ormai non può entrare nemmeno la gente a vederci perché è contro le misure di sicurezza. Lavorando con lui mi sono resa conto che non solo ci divertiamo, ma è anche importante ed è anche riconosciuto. Tenete conto che la comunità europea in questo momento, una delle linee più importanti di sviluppo e di progettazione a livello generale sono i beni culturali. I beni culturali sono considerati oggi un elemento non solo fondamentale della nostra identità europea, della nostra cultura, ma anche un motore imprescindibile per lo sviluppo economico, per la creazione di posti di lavoro. E a questo riguardo il 2018, vi comunico, è stato detto da poco, sarà l'anno europeo dei beni culturali e quindi si apriranno, speriamo con forza, tante tante nuove prospettive nelle quali voi potete essere protagonisti, a meno che non restate nella vecchia tradizione e continuate a fare quello che abbiamo fatto dal secolo scorso e precedente. Poi senza dire altro, thank you for coming, and lui, se parla troppo rapido, se avete qualche domanda importante, se non avete capito qualcosa, gli piace come buon docente che voi interrompete e gli chiedete. Dopo comunque alla fine dell'intervento lasceremo 5-10 minuti per la discussione.
Perfetto. Grazie, buongiorno. Poi parlerò in inglese, no? Che spero non sia un problema per nessuno, nemmeno per me. È stato un po' improvvisato il fatto di parlare in un'altra lingua che non sia l'italiano. Grazie dell'invito e grazie dell'esagerata presentazione che ha fatto la professoressa Ciavarria, un po' esagerata come sempre, ma in realtà prima vi dico questo in italiano, poi comincio a parlare in inglese. Come vedete il titolo dell'intervento parla non tanto di interpretazione storica, molto accademica, ma parla fondamentalmente dell'archeologia come strumento di cambiamento sociale, di trasformazione sociale. Quello che io vorrei farvi vedere, o quello che io vorrei farvi riflettere su il ruolo che noi possiamo avere come archeologi, come scienziati che lavoriamo sulla parte umana, antropica, ma che lavoriamo in un ambito di ricerca che non è solo umanistico, ma che tante volte è a metà tra l'essere umano e la natura. Noi possiamo fare e possiamo andare oltre ai campi, agli ambiti dove abitualmente ci muoviamo. So now I'll begin to speak in English. Well, it's a little bit ridiculous to try to speak in English for an Italian public. And of course you can ask, make comments, whatever you need in any moment, no problem at all. I thought I had a bit more time to make the speech, so I'll try to resume part of the intervention, mainly the historical, the archaeological approach to the problems that we afford. But it's important to understand the historical and the archaeological approach to understand what I want to mean in the title. So water burns more than fire, and we will talk about natural resources. We will talk about water, mainly, that it's a scarce resource, and it's becoming a global problem, and it's becoming a very important conflict globally, and it has been always a very important problem in some areas in the world, and it's been a very important problem for management, for sharing, for acquisition in the area that where we work, mainly in southeastern Spain. So, and this is one of the proverbs that peasants, that farmers usually said. So water burns more than fires, because it's always motive for conflict between people and conflict between villages. As the Professor Chavarria said, it's an intervention. It's part of the Memola project, that it's the Mediterranean mountainous landscapes. It's not only an archaeological approach, it's an approach to agrosystems as a very important part of our cultural heritage. So it's a project that is based on the historical relationship between human beings and natural resources, focusing mainly in water uses and the uses of soil, so the creation and maintenance of the fertility of soils. And it's a project that talks not just about the past, but that talks also about current problems and talks about the future, talks about sustainability, talks about what kind of planet, what kind of society we would like to build for the future. We will travel to the southeastern part of Spain, and we will concentrate in the pictures and examples in this area, but it's something that probably we could apply to many other parts of the Mediterranean, mainly the southern eastern part of the Mediterranean. And we will first ask about irrigation. What is irrigation, and what is irrigation useful for? Why do we need to irrigate? Here it's maybe something that it's not so evident, because there is not such a problem of water for agriculture, for production. So there is maybe too much water for some kind of crops, of agricultural production. But as you can see, we are now in a much more arid environment, and irrigation becomes a social option, a very important social option. We will see from the medieval period, from the Islamic period until now. This is a current picture in the province of Almeria, mainly orange trees and oasis, a real oasis in Europe. So why do you think it could be necessary or could be useful to irrigate? You can reply in Italian if you want. What do you think?
Sono un po' come tu, Sas. They are all Americans.
No, don't worry. Perché pensate che si deve irrigare, o perché pensate che può essere... Sì, no.
In italiano è impossibile fare
No.
questo gruppo purtroppo.
To have more predictable resources.
Mm-hmm. To increase production, yes? That would be the first reply, which is, that's real. That's one of the elements, the key elements to understand irrigation. If you irrigate, you can increase productivity, which is quite important. But there is a second element that is not so evident, but it's very, very important for a peasant society, for a pre-industrial society. There is the possibility to regularize production, and to regularize production mainly in a Mediterranean climate that it's quite unpredictable. Yes, it's quite, can change a lot from one year to another, and mainly in this kind of ambience. So that would be the two main key elements to understand irrigation. Even when the spread of irrigation in the Mediterranean has been traditionally understood mainly as just a cultural factor related with the possibility to spread new crops from Orient, mainly from tropical monzonic climates, and related to this kind of productions. Orange trees and citrus, sugarcane, aubergines, and many other plants, many other crops, not just for eating, but also textile, like cotton, that are related or that need the coincidence of heat and humidity, which is not the case in the Mediterranean environment. So it's an artificial way to make coincide humidity and the heat in a place where they don't usually coincide during the summer. But the real reason, the main reason to understand the irrigation spread is related not with gastronomy, not with the necessity to eat sugar or to cultivate aubergines or bananas or oranges, but it's related mainly with surveillance, with survival, with subsistence, to guarantee the subsistence. And it's related with a different way of organizing production, different way of organizing natural resources, different way of managing the territory of the natural resources. So this is the kind of interpretation, and this is the kind of scenario that we find in the Islamic Spain, in Al-Andalus, during the Middle Ages. So the agrarian transformations that you see here that took place mainly in the early Islamic period in Al-Andalus from the 8th to the 10th century, so until the consolidation of the Caliphate of Cordoba. And it's important to understand this kind of transformations that are related not just with religion, not just with cultural manifestations, but are related mainly with social issues that are at the same time related with the kind of management of natural resources and the kind of management of the territory of the society. So if we want to understand the Islamic society, in this case the Andalusi society, we have to try to understand these transformations that took place during this period, and we have to try to interpret them in a social context. And well, usually they have been inserted in a framework or in a theoretical interpretation as part of the tributary mode of production. So that means that this Islamic society cannot just be understood, but can be also interpreted as a different kind of society, that it's different from the feudal society that will develop in the other part of Europe and the other part of the Iberian Peninsula. So this interpretation is related not just with the agrarian revolution that we will see later, and I'll go quick through this part, but it's related also with the work production goods, so it's related with the ownership of the land, it's related with the ownership of water, the management of water, management of grass, forest. So it's related with the social production relationships, and it's related with the relationship between peasant communities and the state and the formation of the Islamic state. And when we talk about this agrarian revolution, we are not just talking about water management and irrigated agriculture. We are not just talking about this kind of new crops that are coming from other parts of the world. We are talking also about technical innovations and other ways of manage other kind of resources, soils, wild plants, animals, as an integrated traditional ecological knowledge that is the one that make available, that make possible this kind of society. So it is necessary to understand this kind of production. It is necessary to understand this kind of agrarian organization. So it's necessary to understand the agro-ecosystems as social ecosystem to understand the formation of the Andalusi society. It's important to understand not just the irrigated, intensively irrigated lands, but it's important also to understand how communal lands are managed and how the settlement network is organized related to irrigated lands, to common lands, and organized not just by peasant communities, but also organized in their relationship with the state, organized in local districts, and organized in villages that are called alquerías, that refers not just to the settlement, not just to the houses, but refers also to the territory that it's managed by a local peasant community in an autonomous way. For trying to apply an archaeological approach to this kind of organization, specifically related to water management, the hydraulic archaeology was developed in the 90s. Well, it has been then developed also in the last 10 years, also thanks to new approaches in a more complex way of looking at archaeology or interpreting archaeology, so related with the idea of not just landscape archaeology, but related also with the idea of a complex archaeology, as Professor Bujolo explained. So the idea of trying to reconstruct and interpret the hydraulic, the irrigation system and water management should be related not just with the infrastructure, should be related not just with technology, but should be related also with the other elements, social, productive, territorial, and political and economical elements related with these technologies, related with these infrastructures. And of course, we have to take into account that all the agrarian spaces, all the productive areas should be also interpreted as part of the material culture, should be interpreted also as archaeological sites, so that we can know them, we can document them as part of this material culture of past societies. If we want to understand differences and the importance of this irrigation system, we have to also try to understand whether the unirrigated extensive traditional agriculture in the Mediterranean is adapted to the natural cycles. And as I said before, when we introduce the irrigation, we are changing natural conditions and we are creating artificial conditions. And those artificial conditions depend directly on the effort, the energy supplied by rural communities, by peasant communities, by themselves, so autonomously, or directed or obliged by an external power. And that is also one of the key questions to understand and try to understand the kind of society that we are talking about. And when we change these natural conditions and we create the new artificial conditions for agricultural production, we are taking a social option. It's a strategy, so it's not a question of lucky or of luck, or it's not what do you say in arbitrary. I mean, it's something that it's part of an peasant strategy that is always related with the idea of subsistence, guarantee the subsistence for the peasant community. And guarantee subsistence is not just guarantee feed and textiles and material goods, but it's also related with the idea of self-organization. It's always related with the idea of trying to maintain the cohesion of the community as a way to survive, as a way to maintain this subsistence. So when we take this social option, when we make this a strategy preference, all the society have to make an effort, and all the efforts are organized toward this strategy. It's organized towards this social option. And these agro-systems becomes very important, not just in social terms, in economical terms, but becomes also very important in environmental and territorial terms, because we create new agroecosystems that are different from the natural dynamics. We introduce new dynamics, and we have to maintain adding, supplying new energy every year continuously. So that means maintaining the infrastructures, maintaining the social organization, maintaining the fertility of soils, maintaining the communal lands, the social surveillance. So that means that when we make this option, we just not build the new agro-system, but we have to maintain it. And maintain it means to keep on supplying, keep on making the effort for the maintenance of this new artificial system. And this is theoretically, because we have many discussions and debates about the social organization, but this is theoretically the main option for the whole Al-Andalus. Not just the irrigation, not just the irrigated lands, but the social strategy based on self-government and self-management of natural resources related with commons, related with common goods and common collective management of natural resources. So related mainly with a social organization, not just with technology and not just with a specific knowledge, ecological knowledge, but with a complex system of ecological knowledge. In many cases, this social option, the irrigated agriculture, could be seen as the less logical option for many environments, difficult environments like mountainous areas or semi-arid areas. But it is in these strange or less logical areas where the irrigation is implanted, is established, that we can see quite clear that it's a social option, because the effort should be bigger, the energy supply should be more intensive to alter, to transform the environment, and to achieve, to reach the objectives of subsistence using this kind of social organization. So the social significance of this intensive irrigation, this intensive irrigated agriculture, should give us some questions, important questions, trying to relate the irrigated lands with ownership, so the property of land, but also the property of water, the water distribution and the control and social structure, the water control and the organization of peasant communities, water control and territorial organization, the intensive irrigated agriculture and taxation, and of course the intensive irrigated agriculture and commerce. We won't talk about all these things, but it's important to take into account that we are talking about an historical, archaeological approach to these problems to understand the second part of the intervention. And we need also to ask ourselves about two other questions that were made some years ago by Miquel Barceló, mainly the first one, trying to, well, really try to know, to have an approach to the quantity, the amount of irrigated land and the territorial significance of this irrigated land. So, which is the real importance in hectares of this irrigated land in Al-Andalus. And then the second one, that it's even more important, that has to do with all the other questions and all the other reflections that I mentioned before, that is try to qualify So the quality, it's even more important than the quantity, because we need to ask about which is the increase in productivity that we mentioned before. So we need less land. We need to use less portion of the territory to produce the same amount of products, and that changed the relationship between communities and territories, and that's a very important issue when we try to interpret past societies, but also when we try to interpret in terms of environment, the relationship between communities and environment. But also, which were the main crops? The main crops were not palms or orange trees. Main crops were mainly cereals and legumes, but also olive trees and vineyards. So irrigation is not oriented to the new crops, and it's not oriented to the market, but it's oriented to a different kind of strategy. It's oriented mainly to change this relationship in the kind of use of the territory, but it's oriented mainly in the regulation of the productivity. So it's oriented mainly to a different social strategy, always to guarantee subsistence in terms of feed, but subsistence also in terms of autonomy, self-government.
One moment, do you understand everything until here? It's quite complicated, it's not easy, because it's a new way to make archaeology, it's new questions, and to arrive, as he's doing, I've told you many times, my intention with this course is that you learn how to do research, how to answer main questions, historical questions, always, I told you always, we are archaeologists, but our objective is to answer historical questions, and how from a, let's say, from a classical, on the sense of methodology, classical archaeology, we are very far from classical archaeology, we're studying landscapes, how from this landscape study we can arrive to quite, let's say, classical questions at the end. How people were organized, how taxes were employed, how people owned or didn't own the properties. So it's complicated because it's something new, and mainly in this territory it can be complicated for you because we are here in Veneto, an area, as he said, that water is not only not necessary, let's say, but it's super abundant. We have to do quite the contrary, eliminate the water from land in order to cultivate. Granada is a place, as many other places in Spain, it has no water or very few water at all, and that's the reason why water is extremely so important and has to be a communal way to manage it. Okay, we will see, vamos a ver acequias. We'll see then how they control these water channels in a very particular way. And the most important thing that it is not going to talk now is how we can learn from these things from the past today, or I think the contrary more. How doing that things today can help us to understand better the past. Okay?
Yes. Yes, you can make comments and questions, potete chiedere, interrompere, non c'è problema nessuno. Per me è importante che voi capite quello che vi spiego, fondamentalmente per vedere la seconda parte la parte sociale attuale. So, for understanding this kind of agrarian spaces that are very complex from a technological point of view, are quite complicated, are mainly very complicated from a social point of view, we finally discovered that there are two different levels that are a common element in all the hydraulic systems, all the irrigation systems, because we can find a technological unit, we can find the infrastructures, dams, ditches, channels, ponds, mills, even that are integrated in the systems. So all the material elements, the infrastructures that allow the water catchment, transport, and distribution in plots. But there is a social unit that it's even more important and more complex. It's the community that manage that technical unit, and it's the community that has the right to use the water, organize the distribution, the social distribution of water, and manage the whole system. That is called usually irrigator community, comunidad de regantes in Spanish, and that is what we usually call, from a spatial point of view, una vega or una huerta, depending on the area that we are in Spain. And we can find, we can find different kind of organizations and relationship between the technical unit and the social unit. So we can find single one, like this one, with one system and one social unit, and we can find one system with different social units. So the technical unit, the infrastructure is divided in different social units that have to share not just water, but have to share also part of the infrastructure.
What do you mean by social units? Families, for example?
A local community, a rural community. Yes, could be one village, could be more than one village, or could be part of one village, depending on these variables, depending if we're talking about a simple system or a more complex system, sharing infrastructure, or having more than one system. That we'll see now the quite briefly, three different examples. This one, for example, that it's Ferreira. It's a classical, simple, very beautiful example of one infrastructure, one technical unit, managed by one community, the village of Ferreira, that is this one. Yeah, you can see the difference between the irrigated area and the non-irrigated area quite clearly in the old picture of the 50s. So this is the infrastructure. So this is the irrigation system. All the blue lines that you see are irrigation channels, and we can find here for a very small village, now it's something like 200 people, 250 people. In the medieval period, it was more or less the same amount of people, but we can find 118 kilometers of channels, and we have 62 hectares of intensive irrigated agriculture, and we have 139 hectares of eventually irrigated agriculture. But it's a very interesting element that I won't talk about that. If you are interested, we can also talk about different strategies to adapt to scarcity and different peasant strategies to adapt to the amount of water available. So, and the difference between, not just between social management of water, but also the difference in ownership. In this case, for example, all this eventually irrigated area that you can see also quite differently separated. This is the intensive irrigated area. In the medieval period, in the Islamic period, it was the only private property in the village, in the Alquería, and all the eventually irrigated area was part of the communal land, managed collectively, but managed differently from the non-irrigated lands and the forest and pastures. So there were different kinds of common uses and different kinds of communal management of the resources and lands, depending on the orientation, depending on the kind of production. And this is the social unit. So there is one community, and this is the social distribution of the water. Each color it's a different turn for the irrigation. So, so each piece of the system, that it's called pago, it's a pagus in Latin, in Arab it's al-haus, al-foth, has a different turn, and there are many different ways of distributing the water, depending on the possibility to change the water from one place to another, depending on the flexibility or not flexibility to change the water, depending on the adaptation to scarcity, and so on. This is a complex system. Complex system because in this case we find this is the village of Aldeira and Lanteira, and this is the village of Alquife. We are making the excavation, one of the excavations in the Memola project here, in one of the old neighborhoods of the of this village in the first Islamic period. It's a village with a tribal name, an Arab, it's a tribal name, so a family coming from Orient that we couldn't still identify, from Syria, from Yemen, that settled here, and they were the responsible of the creation of all this system. In this case, you can see mainly, it's more complicated, but this purple area and these yellow areas are two different units, technical units. So there are two rivers, and there is a ditch here, a dam. There is another one here that creates two different systems. But this is the division between municipalities, between communities. And you see that there is no coincidence between them, because in the 11th century, there has been an important change in the territorial organization with the creation of a new village, Alquife, that is this one. So the segregation of part of the territory of the old village of Lanteira, that has a Latin name, a late Roman Latin place name. So the segregation, the separation of part of its territory, that can be seen very well in the technical unit. And it was also a separation, a segregation of the social unit that had also consequences in the municipality, in the territory. This is Alquife, and this is Lanteira. You can see the difference between them. So you can see quite clear here how the territory was segregated. Not just because it's smaller, and it's quite clearly, the shape is quite clearly part of Lanteira, but also because we have two other elements that are very important. The new village had the right to take part of the intensive irrigation lands, part of the eventually irrigated lands, but not part of the mountain that it's here. The control of the mountain, of the hydraulic basin, keep on being for Lanteira. That was the older village. And the rights to control the basin were kept by the old village. And we have another interesting element, this piece of land, that it's owned also by Alquife, even if it's separated. Because also this piece of land, that is this one, in red, that it's another system, was divided into two different pieces, one for the new village and one for the old village. So we can see processes of segregation, changes in the territory that are very interesting in this case because it's a change, because it's a change related with, not just with the creation of a village, but it's the creation of a castle created by the new dynasty in Granada, by the Siri dynasty in the 11th century, in the Taifa period after the Caliphate, that was built as the new center, the new head of the rural district in this area, and was made there to control the production of the iron mines that you can see here. So that talks about also the relationship between the state and the peasant communities, the relationship between the power and the rural communities. But there are also some other processes, different processes, concentration. This is the village just close to Lanteira, Jerez del Marquesado, where we have the country processes, the opposite process. This is, this is the village. And here we have 5 different irrigation systems, 5 different technical units for one village, for one single village. Because originally, in the early medieval period, in the Emirate and Caliphate period, during the 11th century, we could find 5 different villages, 5 different communities, each one with its own system. But from the 12th century onwards, we have documented, not in just in this case, but also in many other cases, that there is a concentration of the population. There is an abandon of, in this case, of 4 of the village, and a concentration in one single village that even nowadays is the biggest one in the area, and have 3 rivers for the irrigation, and have 5 different systems that still exist, and they don't share the water. Water is not mixed, and the rights for using the water keep on being the same, just being the same, even when the villages have disappeared more than 800 years ago. This is that village over here. We can see it also in many other cases. This is maybe more complicated. It's in this area here, where there is I thought I had the picture now, where we have also implications from the cities, the city of Guadix that we are also studying, that began to grow and to accumulate lands from other villages. So there is also a process, a concentration process, not just population, but also territory that the cities began to concentrate as part of the growing process and the consolidation process of cities. So if we want to understand these systems, we need necessarily, we need absolutely to understand their relationship with the society that created them. We need to understand why they created them, and we need to understand the relationship that they established, not just with the power, not just with the territory intended as anthropic creation, so the appropriation of the landscape, but the relationship between those rural communities, those societies, and natural resources, the relationship with water, with soils, with plants, wild plants, and domestic plants, the relationship with animals, that is also very important, and it's very important mainly, but not only, for the maintenance of fertility of soils. And we need to understand the social processes that took place in the past and the social processes that condition the current social processes that are taking place now. So we need to understand the social units in this case that manage the water, how they work, how they organize themselves, how is the social surveillance, how is the social distribution of water, how is the social resolution of conflicts, how are the regulations, the role of different people or different elements inside the community, and so on. Not just in the past, but trying to understand the logics, the current logics. And we have to try to understand the social signification also in territorial terms. I'll go quite far. And how natural resources are managed and controlled to understand not just the past, but now I'll pass to quite quickly, but to understand the effort to understand this enormous, this huge amount of energy that was necessary to build those systems, but that is still necessary to maintain the systems. Well, if you want, we can talk later about this. But it's important to understand that in this case, water is not a private property. It's a common good. It's a common element. And the ownerships of the land have not the right to use the water. Water is a right of the land, which is different. So this is one of the key elements to understand, to understand the stability of the system, yes, and to understand also the social conditions and the social condizionanti, sì, condizionanti. Not the conditions, but the yes. To understand why they have survived and why they have been so resilient, that it's another important key word to understand these systems. So why they have had their capacity to adapt to changes, to crises, even very important changes, political changes with different dynasties, wars, with the arrival of the Castilians, the arrival of a late feudal system, climate changes, even quite important climate changes in the 12th century, for example, that we are now understanding a little bit better. Changes even of different kind of crops, changes in markets. So they have been able to survive as social ecosystems, as agroecosystems, for more than 1,000 years until now. And they have demonstrated to be sustainable, not just in social terms, but also and mainly in environmental terms. Water is still there, even if there is a scarcity and climate change and so on. The infrastructure is still there. Water rights and social distribution of water is still there, and it's working. It's not all the same as in the 10th or 11th century, because there has been an adaptation process. But the values and the main elements, the key elements that make possible that the system works, keeps on being the same. So they have demonstrated to be not just resilient, but they have demonstrated to be very efficient. Efficient in economical terms, efficient in social terms, and also very efficient in environmental terms. Because they provide, and we'll see later, they provide us with lots of ecosystem services related with an integral water management resource, related with hydraulic regulation, aquifer recharge, maintenance of springs, but also related with fertility of soils, biodiversity, agrodiversity, and a lot of ecosystems. And they don't use fossil energy. The only energy that they use are gravity and effort, human effort, social effort. So they have demonstrated to be very efficient, but they are not competitive.
One thing, I don't know how many of you understand how the irrigation, exactly how this functions, because we are seeing here, so these lines and these images and so on. You don't understand this, is very difficult, that you follow later.
Mm-hmm.
The system of acequias is this system of channels. It's a very complicated system, which was, as he has said, installed by the Islamic people when they arrived
well, we would have another different kind of landscape, not just in Sierra Nevada, but you have seen also other kind of landscapes in the desert, in semi-arid areas, plain areas. As I said before, it's a social option. If there could have been another different kind of agro-system, non-irrigated, more extensive, there would be a different kind of landscape with different kind of options. So, so there could be also an agriculture, but a different kind of agriculture, much more extensive, with a use of much more extensive of pastures and cattle, or the use of any other resources. But from the 8th to 10th century, there is a social option. There is a main social strategy based on the use of water that conditioned the territory, conditioned the use of natural resources. So when that option becomes preferential, the complete social organization, the complete labor organization, and the complete relationship with the nature changed until now. Yes? And it conditioned also not just society and production, but it conditioned also municipalities and settlement. And so there is a very strong relationship between the use of resources, the use of, in this case, the use of water, and the territory, the whole territory, and the whole society. As I was saying before, and I'm going through this very quickly, they have demonstrated to be resilient, and they have demonstrated to be very efficient in all those aspects, social, economical, and environmental aspects, but they are not competitive. They are traditional agriculture, in some cases with quite hard conditions for access, for the modernization, industrialization. In some other cases, they are plain areas, flat areas, much more comfortable, much more easy to try to mechanize or to... But they have very strong conditions because you cannot change some element without destroying the system. So it's quite difficult to maintain in the current context, in the current framework, those systems, a context that it's marked by a general agrarian crisis. It's a crisis of prices, it's a crisis of overproduction, but it's a crisis of also and mainly of market and control and monopoly of markets. That it's a double crisis for the traditional agrosystems because they cannot compete in the same terms as the industrialized agriculture, and because there has been an abandon of the villages, of the territory, of the activity, and there is a strong process of, you say the age? So people is becoming quite old, and there is not a turnover, so there are few young people that want to continue the activity, not just because of prices, but because of the social condition, the social consideration of the activity. And that is also a very strong negative element for the maintenance and the self-estimation of the rural communities. So when we interpret these landscapes, when we interpret these social ecosystems, we have to ask ourselves, what is this useful for? So all these kind of things that I have told you, and we could have talked for a whole year about ditches and dams and channels and social distribution and the origins and the debates about the state and the rural communities, taxation, markets, and ownership, and Islamic society, pre-Islamic irrigation, the spread of the irrigation in feudal context in north of the Iberian Peninsula, here very closely in the area of the Po Valley, around Milano or Verona, or the extension of the irrigation systems related to the meadows, the irrigation of pastures, mainly from the 12th century, related with monasteries, related with feudal powers, with cities, the extension of the intensive irrigated agriculture related with rice production in Milano, so related with not just with feudal powers, but with the transformation and the first capitalism. We could talk about so many other historical issues, archaeological approaches. But the question that we made, that it's a question that was made to us some years ago, is what is this useful for? And it was a question made by the ancient peasant in one of these villages that we were studying, making interviews, the ethnographic approach, and trying to understand the social organization of the irrigation communities. And, well, the first reply that I thought was, well, this is a very important irrigation system, very old, with more than 1,000 years of existence, and it's a very important part of the cultural heritage, and the cultural heritage coming from Al-Andalus, from the Islamic period. And it's a beautiful landscape. But it was not the kind of reply that he needed. And so he asked again, what is this useful for? So I tried to convince him, saying that we were making a map in a GIS, very modern, so that they would have, for the first time, a cartography of the channels, the complicated network of channels, and the complicated distribution of water that they could use also for the administration. But that is something that is not useful for them, because their GIS is here, and it's all based in oral tradition. And it's a strategy to avoid the intervention of the state, the intervention of the external powers. So that is something that they don't need at all. And they try to avoid that intervention. In fact, there is a law of the of the 19th century, when the water became a public good, owned and managed by the state, that obliged all these peasant communities, all these irrigators communities to regularize their situation, to have a concession of water by the state. Most of the irrigation communities are still not regulated after more than 150 years, and the state has almost no control, because it's a social strategy for continue being self-governance and autonomous from the medieval period. Yes? So that's something that was not needed for them, and it was not a good reply for him. So we need to give a reply. What is useful for? What is the archaeology useful for? Is our job, is our research useful for the people, for current problems? Yeah, we could. Yes, we could think that we are right, and that we study, we reflect, and we can even think that we have the truth, so that we know what they need, even if they don't know that they need it. Yes, that might be truth. Yes. Yeah, it's quite complicated, and it's it's been something that has make us reflect a lot, to give a satisfactory reply, not for us, but for them. For them means not just for the old people that we usually interview and are the most part of the rural population, but satisfying also for the young people that would like to live there, or that even if they don't think they could live there, we could give them an opportunity to come back and to live there. So what we try to do in very simple ways, try to dignify their lives, dignify their job, dignify their self-estimation, and of course, and that's very important, try to contribute to dignify their lives, also trying to make possible living in rural areas. So, because if we want to preserve all this heritage, very important, beautiful heritage, if we want to preserve those landscapes, systems, tangible and intangible values, we need to preserve the activity, and we need to preserve people. So we need to protect the main factor, the main heritage, that it's people. People living there, people using resources, people taking care of the infrastructure, distributing the water, and people that transmit knowledge, practices. Yes. So that would be the abstract reply, the theoretical reply. So how can we do that? How can we change a little bit our approach without leaving the scientific, archaeological, historical, and precise approach, the academic approach? So trying to support and trying to give also our opinion, saying, well, that is what I think, and I think that could be a good way to help. That could be a good way to solve the problems. So first we have to try to change the kind of approach that we usually have in our disciplines, not just in archaeology. So trying to go beyond the separation of disciplines and try to think that archaeology is not about ceramics, pottery. Archaeology is not about monuments and stones, and they work a lot about building archaeology, archeologia dell'architettura, and but archaeology is also about all these kind of things that I have told you before. It's about water and soils and plants and social management and traditional ecological knowledge, and it's about the relationship between social communities and natural resources. So archaeology is a little bit about everything. And we have, well, we are lucky because we study human beings and past societies, but we study them in their context. So we study them mainly from a material point of view, and we study them in their relationship with natural resources that have a physical expression, and that has a material expression, and has also an intangible expression. And I'm not talking about a post-processual approach, but intangible in terms of knowledge, in terms of practices related with these problems. So we have to approach in a more complex way. We have to conceive the archaeology in a more complex way. And in fact, well, now I'll talk you, and I used even more and more used to talk less about archaeology and more about botany, hydrology, hydrogeology, agronomy, ecology, and there are many times that people say, well, you were an archaeologist, or what are you studying? What are you professor? and that's something that it's quite good, and I feel quite comfortable because I'm not just an archaeologist, and it's not a problem. And I'm part of a medieval history department, not even an archaeology department. So, so it could be even more strange from an academic point of view. But that's not a problem, because if you are able to understand the complexity, if you are able to have an approach to that complexity, the surname or the etiquette, the label, doesn't matter. Yes? So we have to try to understand the landscapes as an archaeological site, as part of the material culture, but we have to try to understand them from a historical point of view as a part of a co-evolutive process. So it's something that is really complex, where there is a very important part represented by people, peasants in this case, and their knowledge. Here in this picture there is concentrated an enormous part of knowledge, practices. I mean, it's not just a gentleman irrigating his plot, but here we have water management, we have plant management, because we have the association between corn and beans, so we have the association of plants. We have also soil management, and we have also a very interesting thing, intangible things. One is that, well, he's working without shoes, and so it could be something that it's not important, but it talks about the relationship between people and earth, people and water, and he's happy. I mean, he seems to be quite satisfied with the work that he's doing. Yes, that it's not, well, something an historical issue, maybe, but it's something that it's important, because we are, as I said before, we should talk about dignifying and make better people's lives. So we have to take into account that we are talking about effort, energy, labor or work, and that it's not related with a single element, not related with the construction of channels like this, but it's related with the change, a complete change of our environments, in this case with the construction of terraces, walls for those terraces, creation of new soils. So we have to think in terms of efforts when we talk about that. And we, as I said before, we have to also try to think about social options. Yes? And social options means the maintenance, means to keep on doing this effort. So these are the people that we usually find when we make our work. There are some young farmers that claim when we talk, because they say, well, you always show old people working in the fields, and you never show a young person with a tractor working in those traditional historical irrigation systems. And well, and that's true. I mean, that's a reality, and that is an important part of the people that we are working with. But I would like to talk to you mainly about the idea of, well, our social impact and our social responsibility. Let's try. Our social responsibility. Yes? All the things that I have told you have consequences. Lots of consequences. If we try to move all these things from 1,000 years ago to the current context, to the current frameworks, we could talk about all these social options, natural resources management, sustainability, resilience, ecosystem services, and water management. And these are the current problems of these people, not the problems of the 10th century. These are the current problems of these people. So, so we can give them a lot of tools, and we can work with them to try to preserve together the landscapes and the systems and the values. We can do a classical, more or less classical work that we all do in the Memola project, in many other projects, trying to communicate and trying to engage people during this communication and dissemination with different models, telling, the direct model, sharing, a lay expertise model, or involving public in part of our activities. So trying to make part of community archaeology, participative approach in the research or in the disseminations, making conferences, seminars, workshops, and different kind of presentations, trainer of trainers, that it's very important, not just for schools, but in many other contexts, documentaries and digital tools, roundtables, discussion groups, meetings, in all kinds of meetings, exhibitions, thematic groups, and field works. So all these kind of things that are being done also here in Padova, in the Colli Euganei, the Grandparents' Day, the Love Heritage Day, European Research Night, yes, storytelling, cooperative games, scale models, the work also with the schools, high schools, co-creative processes for exhibitions, for digital tools, blogs, intergenerational meetings, everything, yes? That is very necessary, that it's essential, because we need to make an effort trying to communicate what we do and why we do these kind of things, yes? So we have to try to connect with people, not just giving results, but also trying to engage and involve people in the research so that we can understand their knowledge and they can transmit their knowledge, but we can also understand their needs, what they think, how they see themselves and their situation, and how they see the future. Yes? So there should be a knowledge dialogue, so a dialogue between traditional ecological knowledge and academic knowledge, but there should be also a dialogue in terms of problems, in terms of expectatives, in terms of needings. Yes? That goes even beyond the academic or the traditional ecological knowledge. And when we do that, we talk about elements like citizenship, so the idea of belonging, but also the idea of participation, not just to participate in an excavation, that it's important, or participate in another activity in a cultural route or the co-creation process, but to participate with the idea to defend, conquest rights. So the idea to dignify people's life, the idea to propose projects, planification, regulation, economical approach, etc. And we can do it at the local level with the farmers, so with the local people, with the schools, with the municipalities. We can do it at the regional level with the associations or the regional governments. We can do it on an international level, in this case in a European level, with policy briefs, with international meetings and whatever. And also using the academia. And our tools, our dissemination and communication tools can become a more effective tool, not just to communicate and to disseminate, but they can transform, they can become a transforming tool of the reality. So making meetings like this one, for example, for the improvement of the production and try to solve problems of productivity, conservation of local varieties, that it's also a very important part of the heritage and the agrodiversity, problems related with soils, with water management, with environmental regulation, with agricultural regulation, with the improvement of organic production, markets, and problems with the national parks, problem with the hydrologic basin regulation. So we become mediators. We have become mediators between local communities and administration. And they trust in us. So we have a responsibility, a huge responsibility. We are not just making research and try to have a feedback, giving them the results. We have a compromise with the people. And that changed completely their relationship with the local communities. That changed completely the relationship with people. And it's quite dangerous because it can create dependence. And try to avoid dependence, it's quite difficult. Yes? But it's a very important role. Because when they have a problem with the national park, they have a problem with the regional government, they have a problem with the hydrologic basin, they call us. They don't call the engineers, they don't call the hydrologist, or they don't call the agronomist, they call the archaeologist. And when the government of the province has need an expert in water management a couple of months ago to make a meeting for the preservation of the plain area of Granada, the irrigated plain area of Granada, so the integral cycle of water, they didn't call the hydrologist. They called the archaeologist, even for talking about recycling of water. And when they have called us to talk about hydrogeology, and we work, but they do it because we work with hydrologists, botanists, agronomists, and we don't substitute their work. We work together with them. And we propose things that are interesting for other disciplines. We propose questions that are important for those disciplines. And we can also try to ask questions that are important for the other disciplines. I think that's the difference. So when we make trainings and workshops, this is a workshop about innesting, I don't know the word in English, but per innestare le piante, gli alberi. Trying to preserve traditional ecological knowledge, trying to preserve local varieties. And we have made collaborative work in many other ambience. So I'll go quite quickly to this. Working with these local irrigator communities has moved us to try to initiate a process of empowerment of the communities. Those communities have been always isolated, not just in front of the power, but isolated between them, because they don't have relationship if they don't have to fight for the water. So if they don't have to share the water, so if they don't have to fight for the water, they usually don't have relationship between them. And so they have been always quite isolated. What we have initiated, what we have promoted, is a process, a very complicated process for the creation of the first, you see here, the first association of local irrigated communities in Andalusia. It has been, and it's been, a very complex process. We have had meetings with more than 120 local irrigators communities in the provinces of Granada and Almería. That is quite a lot. Quite a lot because you have to take into account that there are no contacts. So you cannot go to the administration and say, well, I want to know how many are there, and I want the telephones or the contact of the presidents of the responsible of the... There are no contacts and almost no information. So now it's the administration that is calling us for information about these local communities. And we have created this association that now there are about 30 local irrigator communities inside the association in a very complicated process because they have to celebrate assemblies to approve the joining the association. And just those 30 local communicators, irrigators, are something more than 13,000 hectares of irrigated lands, and are something more than 11,000 people inside the association. So you can imagine how slow and how complicated is this process. But it has had a lot of interesting consequences for the administration, because for the first time, these local communities have become visible to the administration, and they are becoming, or the intention is that they will become interlocutor, with the administration. So they are taking into account for planning, for regulations, for all the things that would affect their management of water and the territory, and they can defend for the first time. They can defend their historical rights together. So we are creating a movement, an important movement that it's quite delicate, and it's also a very important responsibility, so that they can organize themselves and they can defend themselves in this complex context, and they can demonstrate that they are efficient, that they are resilient, that they don't waste water when they do their traditional practices, that they are not medieval as an insult, that they are not underdeveloped, that they are the future. They are not just the past, but they are the future, because they have demonstrated to be resilient, because they have demonstrated to be sustainable. And the current context, the current framework, talked us about, not about the increasing of productivity and the green revolution, but talks to us about sustainability and changing paradigms and changing models. So that's what the kind of things that we are trying to do. Also at an academic level, because we have to convince also our colleagues, hydrologists, hydrogeologists, agronomists, a big part of the academy, that they are efficient, they are resilient, they are useful. So we have also to demonstrate that from a scientific point of view, they need to survive, because we need that they survive. And I'm finishing. Yes? So the idea is try to, what I was going to show you, now we have just finished a new collaborative map with these locally irrigated communities in the provinces of Granada and Almeria, just 2 provinces. And we have documented something like more than 830 locally irrigated communities in the 2 provinces. That means, I think I had here, and I'm going to finish with this, with the rights and yes. We have documented more than 550 locally irrigated communities and more than 830 spaces, irrigated areas. That means almost 200,000 hectares of irrigated land just in those 2 provinces, most of them dating from the medieval period, from the Islamic period, most of them still in use, in a process of abandon and marginalization. That means a huge crisis, a social crisis, economical crisis, territorial crisis, a huge change in landscape and the relationship between societies, communities, and environment. And that means more than, we made a spatial analysis, that's an estimation, more than 24,000 kilometers of channels, irrigation channels. So you can imagine the effort, you can imagine the energy supply. And that means more than 90,000 owners, people that belong to those irrigated communities. So we have a real impact. we have a social, environmental, and economical impact. And we have a very big responsibility. And that makes that the archaeology can become the center, or can be in the center, not just of the research, but can be at the center of the social problems, the environmental problems, the current and the future challenges for our territories and for the whole planet. And so I will suggest you to go beyond archaeology, go beyond the ceramics, go beyond the stones, and try to find people and try to find nature. Thank you very much. Well, I think first of all it's not the responsibility, or not just the responsibility of governments or the administrations, but it's our responsibility. So first of all, we have to change the kind of approach that we have. So we have to go beyond archaeology and try to think of the question, what is this useful for? Also the stones and potteries and all the historical interpretation that I made at the beginning are important, and I think it's important that, well, that we see that we have to make a good archaeology as best as possible to try to arrive to the conclusions and try to arrive to the part that I said. But the first thing is try to change our approach. That means to change or to move partly our epistemology, so the way we see our discipline and the object of our discipline. So have a wider vision and try to propose things, interesting things for other disciplines. That would be the first step, the easiest one, because we have a lot of questions that are interesting for agronomists, hydrologists, botanists, economics, lawyers. We have a lot of questions that are very interesting for them, but they have never thought about them because they think about history or archaeology in a very simple, narrow way or in a very romantic way. Yes? So we have to demonstrate that archaeology and history is something more than monuments, something more than the classical approach, making questions, interesting questions for them. And then working with local communities, trying to work together with them, trying to make this kind of approaches, adapting to the different kind of challenges. So we have the first responsibility. Now we are preparing, today we have to submit a new project proposal for the European Union that it's in the environmental call. It's not even cultural heritage, and it's led by archaeologists, and it's about the recuperation and restoration of traditional irrigation systems. No? Well, the name is Recovery Channel, but it's also quite funny. But we can make proposals. In this case, it's a proposal in a call that it's called cultural heritage as a driver for sustainable growth. So we have to make the proposals.